Cedar Point has one of the greatest coaster collections in the world, with rides like Millennium Force and Steel Vengeance. However, even the best roller coasters in the world have bad moments. These moments are either slow, boring, rough, or all three. Everyone talks about the best parts of every Cedar Point coaster, but it is still important to mention these bad moments too. These are the worst moments on every Cedar Point coaster. Gatekeeper is an underrated coaster in the lineup of Cedar Point. It has many unique elements with the wing seating, with a wing over drop, 4 near misses, and provides a very smooth and graceful experience. All of these elements are great, even this airtime hill, which actually provides airtime in the back cars. The only part that doesn't fit with the rest of the coaster is this ending helix after the mid-course. The mid-course on Gatekeeper is near the end of the ride, with only this painfully slow helix separating it and the final brakes. This results in a slow finale of the coaster after a great ride experience. Unlike the rest of the valleys on the ride, it doesn't provide many forces either. Raptor is a similar story to Gatekeeper. Some may say the Cobra roll of this very intense roller coaster is the worst part. I disagree. I think that, unlike what a lot of people say, the Cobra roll is very whippy and smooth if you brace for the first transition. The worst part on Raptor is undoubtedly the very last turn in the brakes. After a pretty smooth and whippy ride experience, the last turn is slow with a violent whip into the brakes. There is no avoiding this whip into the brakes, you just have to pin your head to the back of the seat to avoid headbanging. You are guaranteed to hit your head on the restraint at this moment, which is not a great way to conclude such an intense and smooth coaster like Raptor. Blue Streak is the oldest coaster in the park and is by no means a smooth ride. It's not horribly rough, just has a strong rumble in the valleys, which can be surprising if you're unprepared. Blue Streak has a lot of similar elements back to back, making it difficult to pick the worst moment. All of the airtime hills provide a pretty smooth floater pop. So the worst part of Blue Streak is the turnaround. Unlike some wooden coaster turnarounds such as Twister, Blue Streak provides no laterals and instead a strange bouncing feeling that's found nowhere else on the coaster. It's not painful, just a little uncomfortable compared to the rumble found on the rest of the ride. Believe it or not, I actually really enjoy Valravn more than other enthusiasts. The holding brake is pretty cool and the drops are full of airtime. However, there is only one part that doesn't stack up on Valravn. Like Blue Streak, Valravn is a very well-rounded coaster. The only part that leaves a sour taste is the dive loop after the second drop. For whatever reason, this is by far the bumpiest part of the coaster. The dive loop itself doesn't have as much hang time or force as the other two inversions, and the rattle can really get to your head after just one ride. It's not terrible, just slightly surprising on such a smooth coaster. Once again, there isn't a specific part of Iron Dragon that sticks out. It's a family coaster through the woods that isn't very fast or forceful, so it doesn't have a lot of room for error. The entire first half is fun through the trees, but the second half has one moment that is a little iffy. The valley over the water after the steep drop has a jolt when the ride swings to the left, causing some headbanging if you're not careful. This is the only painful part of this old aero coaster. Corkscrew, compared to Iron Dragon, is very, very rough. The entire ride shuffles and each element has jolts in and out of the valleys and strong headbanging on the turns. The transitions, especially in the second half with the corkscrews, are questionable, as this coaster was made before computer design. The most painful, and therefore worst part of Corkscrew, is the questionably shaped vertical loop. The vertical loop is too quick to experience the hanging sensation, which means it should have some intensity. While it is rather intense because of the old design, those forces hurt. The loop slams you down hard and rattles all around, making it impossible to enjoy unless your head is outside the restraints. Rougarou may be the easiest ride to pick the worst part of. Overall, I think Rougarou gets a little too much hate. The first half is great with the big drops, hang time filled loop, and super intense off-axis loop and whip to the side. However, in the second half, I understand the hate. While the turns are boring, the worst part of Rougarou is the corkscrew. For whatever reason, this is the only B&M corkscrew in the park to provide this shaky of an experience. The whole corkscrew rattles around, so you are guaranteed to hit your head on the hard restraints. This is the most painful moment on any coaster in the park besides the arrows. We're at one of the big three at Cedar Point now with Millennium Force. This was the first ever Giga coaster, and this ride is designed to be a speed machine. The whole coaster is pretty smooth with a barely noticeable rattle in the middle of the ride. The beginning is fast and intense, and the ending is smooth and graceful. This was the hardest one to pick the worst moment for, but I have to go with the ending straight section. Compared to the rest of the ride, after a fast-paced airtime hill, this straight section just feels like they could have added another airtime hill. The rumor has it that the ride was going to be extended further out, but space limitations occurred. Millennium is still a fantastic ride, and this is just a small nitpick in an otherwise perfectly designed coaster. Magnum was the first ever hypercoaster in 1989 and is another coaster in the park where it is divided on what the worst element is. Some may think the back-to-back airtime hills in the finale are the worst part because of the sharp apexes. However, while some think this is painful, if you sit further back in the train, all of this pain is eliminated and turned into floater airtime. The worst part of Magnum without question is the whole turnaround. Aero was never good at doing turns, and Magnum is no exception. Magnum's turnaround has shaky transitions that rattle the train back and forth. The worst transition is the one out of the turnaround, as it feels like it jolts 3 times before finally reaching the right banking. Gemini is a fan favorite coaster, but as a Cedar Point home parker, I never really got the hype for Gemini. It's a fun family coaster with the racing aspect, but the ride experience is nothing special. The worst element for me, and in this case, elements, as this moment happens 3 times throughout the ride, are the slow, forceless, and drawn-out turns. It's not like the turns are rough, it's just that they do absolutely nothing. It is sometimes fun to have the other train racing, but sometimes Cedar Point only runs one side, making it just a drawn-out turn. Cedar Creek Mine Ride is my least favorite major coaster at Cedar Point. It's meant for families, but even compared to other mine trains, it's just rough and a boring experience. It's cool being over the water, but compared to even the other family coasters at Cedar Point, it's not worth the lines. The worst part of this classic coaster is definitely the turns after the main drop. After gliding over the water, Cedar Creek Mine Ride jolts upwards while awkwardly banked. This awkward jolt flings riders into a bad aero transition where riders will get whiplash into the side of the train. This is one of the many moments of whiplash on Mine Ride, but combined with the awkward jolt upwards, it makes this the worst element on the coaster. We've reached the last 2 coasters and the 2 best coasters in the park. Maverick is a fan favorite coaster that is incredibly well rounded and fast paced from start to finish. Every turn is whippy but comfortable, and the elements are extremely intense. The only element on the ride that doesn't stack up is actually where the most extreme element was, the Heartline roll, but it was removed prior to opening. Now an S-bend takes its place, but this S-bend is not whippy and instead just feels like a straight section. The high speed makes it still enjoyable, but it doesn't compare to the other elements on the coaster. Finally, we have the king of Cedar Point, Steel Vengeance. Steel Vengeance is considered by many to be the best coaster ever built, including me. So that begs the question, is there really a bad part of Steel Vengeance? And the answer is no, but still I have to find the worst element on the coaster. That worst element is the only element on the coaster that can be considered uncomfortable to some, and that is the very last overbank before the stretch of airtime hills. After the 4th inversion, the ride turns slightly to the right to line up with the overbank, but it isn't banked, so if you aren't prepared on this last inversion, your head could get snapped to the side, causing a bit of whiplash. It's not as painful as Mine Ride and remains the only slightly uncomfortable part of Steel Vengeance. The overbank itself provides a little floaty sensation, but isn't as special as the other elements on the coaster. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Comment what you think the worst part of Cedar Point roller coasters are, and have a great rest of your day.